Hello, Adam Gower here, and welcome to the GowerCrowd Podcast syndication in the digital age at GowerCrowd.com. Now, today we're going to be talking about Google Analytics, which is a field that I have only just recently discovered, but that's not quite true because I've been doing SEO, search engine optimization, for a good 18 months now and using Google Analytics, but I'm really diving into it deep. And my guest today is one of the foremost experts in that, Chris Mercer, aka Mercer, of Measurement Marketing. Now, this is a very technical area, actually, but don't be intimidated. What you're going to hear in today's episode is Mercer talking at a basic 101 level and then doing deep dives into some of the concepts. This is what you're going to be hearing about. You're going to learn how to use analytics to make sure that your website is having the conversation that you want to have with your prospects. Absolutely brilliant. I mean, the depth of data that Google has is really extraordinary. There are also some amazing quotes, actually. I'll give you a couple of them right now. Data analytics, this is from Mercer today, you're going to hear about. Data analytics, truth is in the trend. Gotta love that, right? Find out more about that in this episode. Google Analytics, the power is in the pattern. Really powerful concepts that are abbreviated to these simple ideas, but that can have such a powerful impact on the way you run your business, on the way you run your website, and on how you find prospects and convert them into being investors. Be sure to go to GowerCrowd.com to look at the podcast page for today's episode, where I'll include links to Mercer's website. And please be sure to sign up for my brand new newsletter. It's the only newsletter in the industry that covers exclusively the real estate crowdfunding industry. We collate every article that we can find every week that is on real estate crowdfunding from all the marketplaces, from the sponsors, whatever there is out there. It's all in one place for you, together with videos, webinars, etc. It's all in one place. Please sign up there, GowerCrowd.com. And now, without further ado, from measurement marketing to talk about the incredibly complex but vitally important tool of Google Analytics and data analytics for your website, Chris Mercer, aka Mercer of Measurement Marketing. Mercer.
Howdy, howdy. How are you, sir?
I am just fantastic. Super excited to talk to you. Seriously, I am just, I have become a massive fan of data analytics. And
nice.
You are a wizard, a true wizard in this area. So I've been looking.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you.
I put together a list of questions and I'm not even going to tell you what they are.
Those are the best podcasts, right? Like if you were a tree, what could I, like, okay, that's great. If I answer too strong, yeah. It's brilliant.
Exactly right. All right, so I'll tell you what, before we start though, is there anything that any questions that you have of me? I really would like to give you that.
How you think, the best way that I can serve the audience, right? Like my job is to make you look like a rock star as much as possible for part of the tribe. So, what serves them, what sort of things do they really need to know, or, the mindset they're currently in when it comes to this stuff, and how can I help?
Okay. Did you say as much as you can do to make me look like a rock star?
Exactly right.
You've got no chance, I'm afraid. You're barking up completely the wrong tree with that.
Never say never.
Okay, yeah. Stones are still some of the people, some of the time, but my audience are on to me, so there's no chance about that. I'll tell you that right now.
Rockstar, the manager of the Rockstar. How's that? You could be that guy. Yes.
The manager of the Rockstar, or the guy that carries his bags, more likely.
He could be a roadie. Hey, never too old to be a roadie. Yeah.
Let me turn off all these bloody noises. Hang on a second. There we go. Click those. Right. So I think just being you, Mercer, seriously, I think that I will tell you that data analytics is beyond the comprehension. The depth of where you can go with this is beyond the consciousness of probably anyone that's listening. Seriously.
Okay, fair enough. We'll
and so what I'd like to do is to start maybe at 50,000 feet. In fact, that's how I'm going to start us off here.
Yep.
is at 50,000 feet and then dive down. Mercer. Well, I'm so excited to talk to you seriously, and I've been dying to ask you this one question, and I told you before, they're all going to be a surprise. So here we go. It's actually a double barrel question, but it goes like this. Is there anything that Google doesn't know and about us, and of the things that they do know about us, what are the most exciting things that they will share with us when we try to find our ideal prospects?
This is interesting. Okay, so tackling the first ones first, right? So the first things first. If we think about what Google knows about us, Google owns essentially the highway that we're using in a lot of cases, right? And they own the car that you're using. So if you think about you're signing into your browser, you're checking your email, like that's the equivalent of the car, and you're doing the searching, and the searching is like using the information superhighway, and they own that. So they know an awful lot about us as individuals. What's interesting, and this is very recent over the years, the big thing on data privacy and who owns the data now? Is it Google's data, or is it our data that we're allowing Google to hold? And there's a battle, and there's a trend that's starting to reverse back to the users owning the data, right? And us saying, hey, I'm just leasing the car from you, but it's, I get to keep everything in the car, right? Whereas before it was like Google keeps everything that you leave behind, right? And it's not so much that anymore. So Google knows a ton about us, for sure. Probably more than Google even knows that they know at this point, because I'm sure they just collect everything to collect everything, because they're at the scale where they can. But what can they share? That's been a rapidly changing question. So it used to be they would share with an advertiser, for example, everything and anything. It didn't really matter, right? And then you have these laws and compliance that comes through where, even this, as a simple example, HIPAA in the US, where HIPAA law keeps them from doing medical. And so they can't really share medical stuff because you can't target medical stuff because it violates HIPAA. And then you have GDPR coming down the pike, and you have California's laws coming down the pike, and more, Google can't really necessarily share with you what they know. But you can go to them, especially if you're going for advertising, any sort of lead generation or something like that, which is where a lot of marketers are using Google. They have the data, they just can't necessarily give it to you. They sort of have to say, well, yeah, we'll share it to people that we think are like that, but they can't give it to you, right? That you can't export that data and use that. So it's still incredibly useful to work with Google. Google's an incredible partner. Google's got incredible tools like analytics and everything from Gmail to analytics to Google Ads to search and everything else that they have in the Googleverse. And I'm firmly team Google. Like, I'm not afraid at all about that. I use Calendar. I use every Drive, right? I'm in the Googleverse for sure. I welcome our Google overlords.
You know what? My biggest fear in life is that Google will go down one day.
Could you imagine?
I'd go down.
So I recently, as of kind of where we're recording this, we've got the whole pandemic, right? It's a fairly big news story around the planet. Most people have heard about this. And I was always thinking, like, to me, it's like, we're fortunate because we're very internet based. So it didn't affect our team that much. We're around the world, we're distributed. We already had those systems in place. And a lot of people obviously know the markets it did dramatically affect in the physical world. But to your point, I've thought about, like, what happens, not if, but when the internet virus gets released. That does do that, where it's like, okay, and I'm thinking to myself as a business owner, I'm already like, I'm going to figure out how to do a candle store, and I'm going to have like a juice store somewhere, shoes, because you just want to be diversified, right? So that the internet stuff goes down, I'm like, well, I got that candle making store, so let's go do that, right? We make your own toilet paper. Let's do a crafty Etsy thing. We'll do it Etsy, and until that goes away, and then we'll have
yeah, exactly. Where are you going to sell it?
That's right. You got to have that local marketing. That's where the local marketing comes in. Right? You don't just pick your poison. You got to do both. Got to have both.
That's hilarious.
It's important to diversify.
Yeah, I mean, the more the deeper and deeper I get into Google, like I started using Google Docs. I really rejected it. Not Docs. I still haven't got into the Docs so much, but Google shared drives. I don't want to get too much down, so we're only getting some specific stuff. I always used to keep things locally because I can search it. I kind of feel like I have control over it. Yeah. I've got backups like left and right. I must have four different backup systems locally, but everything on Google, no, they control that, not me. So that's out of my control. But let me ask you let me ask this though. My first question was, so for just to really kind of give the idea, to just dive into the power of the data that we can access
Yes.
through Google Analytics specifically, not advertising. Let's get into analytics because this I've started to really love using.
Yep.
What are for somebody who's wanting to find prospects to raise money from, high net worth individuals, what are kind of the most useful tools inside Google Analytics? If there were three things that you would tell somebody, and remember that I think, without being talking down to my audience, I didn't really understand. I'm new to this.
Right.
I have some, relative to the people that I know a lot. Relative to the people that know a lot, I know nothing, right, basically. Yep. But what are the key things? So keep that in mind, right? So what are the key things, the three key most useful tools in Google Analytics that somebody could start with?
So I'm a big fan of taking what systems are already in place that are working in your organization or in your company, and then you can sort of apply those to something new, right? Because it's easier to get into something new. And for a lot of people, obviously analytics is new because they're just using it for the first time, or maybe they've tried to use it and then they got kicked around by it because they just see a bunch of numbers, not sure what anything means, and like, I'll come back to this in a few years, right? When it makes right. When it matters. And so I'm gonna pull out a little bit from Google Analytics and just talk about numbers in general.
Okay.
So a lot of times, especially in any sort of sales organization where you're selling something or you're acquiring something, there's a pipeline. And a lot of people are familiar with that term, right? Where there's this pipeline of number of requests that you get or leads coming in or dials that you're making or doors that you're knocking on, anything along those lines. It's how many people am I asking to do the thing I want them to do? Then there's going to be a certain percentage of those that will engage with that and will actually start to initiate the journey. And there's a certain percentage of those that will then finish the journey. And that is across the board, across industry, across business model, online or offline, doesn't matter. Every business has those three things. You ask them to start the journey. Some will engage. Of those, some will complete the journey. Mm-hmm. So it's something we call ACE goals a lot, where it's just like you set up a goal for when they are aware of the thing you want them to be aware of. You set up a goal when they complete the journey you want them to complete, and you set up an engagement goal along the way. Now, offline, again, that might be, okay, I'm going to create a dial for dollars, so to speak, right? I'm calling up leads and I'm talking to people and I'm getting them on the phone, or trying to, right? So that's the dials that you're doing. You might track the number of dials that you're making. Then you might track the number of actual appointments that you had or quality conversations that you had as an engagement signal. And then, whatever the next step is for you, whether you're requesting a pack or something like that, or, sending money in, or whatever the thing is that you're trying to get as a completion goal. Online, it works exactly the same way. It just looks different. Right? So it's the exact same thing that you're already doing. It's just that you use this other tool, which shows you from the digital end how to do it. So it might be awareness. Now you're not dialing anymore for them. You're not calling them up, or they're not filling out a lead card necessarily, like a paper card somewhere, but they are seeing your page. And it might be, okay, now they're aware of the fact that we do this thing, right? That we offer this product or the service or this property or whatever the thing is that you're trying to promote. Then engagement might be request more information. So they fill out a form, and now that's your engagement, where now you're saying, okay, cool. I know X amount of people, maybe 100 people saw the page, 25 of them completed the form. So now you've got 25 leads, and then you emailing them that prospect, that form, and maybe you're doing a phone follow-up or something like that. That can actually complete that journey, right? Whatever that is for them, close that deal, whatever that happens to be, and you would measure for that. And so that's kind of the beauty of where analytics comes in, because that's really hard to get any other way. And analytics is built for that. Google Analytics is built to collect that information. It stores that information for you, and then it gives you reports, which is how you're using it. You're using it at the report level, and you see these reports that say, well, here are the pages they're seeing, and here are the results that you're getting. Now, going back to your actual question of like, what are the three big things in Google Analytics? The first thing I would start with is something called the source medium report, which is a really weird sounding name. But all it means is it gives you a list of what the traffic sources are. So that is, what that means is where the people are coming from. How did they find your site? Which brand, which company sent you traffic, right? Sent those eyeballs to your site. That's what that means. And then it tells you the type of traffic. So as an example, it might be you're doing Facebook ads. It might say Facebook is the brand of traffic that came from Facebook and it was paid ads. Or it might be your email system, right? Like we use Infusionsoft for our email system. So maybe Infusionsoft sent the traffic, or ActiveCampaign sent the traffic, and it was email, the type of traffic called email. And so that's what that report does. It identifies how people found you. this is important because just like if you have an office building, people are walking through, you want to know how they found you, right? What generated the traffic coming into your office building. It's the same thing when you're with analytics. What generated the traffic coming onto your site about the office building, whatever it is that you're promoting. So analytics tells you that. So identifying your traffic sources is key, and Source Medium does that for you. Built in, you don't technically have to do anything to it initially. There's some things you can do it to make it better, but initially it will tell you, did they come from a third-party site, right? Or did they come from Google search? So is your search traffic working? Are you ranking in search engines? Or did they just come in directly to your site? They just kind of showed up on their own. Like it'll kind of classify them in those three big ways. So you have that Source Medium report that shows you your traffic sources. That is how people came to your site. It also shows you, which is why I like this report so much, the results of that traffic. So on that same report, you can kind of look over and it'll say, oh, they came in from Facebook. And then you can say, well, how many people did Facebook make aware? And you can measure for that. It's what they call a goal in Google Analytics. You set it up. It takes a little bit of setup. It's not that complicated to do, but you can set up a goal for when they were aware of the thing you want them to be aware of, whatever the property was or project or something like that. Did they engage? Did they become a lead? You can just flip the goals. Did they become a lead? Did Facebook help them to become a lead? And did Facebook help them actually close if that's what you're trying to do, if that's what Facebook was supposed to do? Maybe it was email that was supposed to do that. You would see that. And so that report shows you where your traffic's coming from, and it shows you what the results of that traffic was. And then in the middle of that report, there's some nice juicy details, and it's a bunch of different numbers, but essentially what they show you is engagement. So things that they call bounce rate, which is like, I know people come to the site and then leave. That's what they call a bounce. But that sort of thing is like, you can look at that and you can see engagement. You say, oh, Facebook bounces less, which means they're more engaged, right? Has a lower bounce rate. So you start to see all of this in this one report. And so going back to the question of like, what are the three things? You got to know how many people are aware of you in the first place. You got to know how many people are completing the journey that you intend for them to complete. And again, very similar to what you're doing offline already. It's the same thing, just online now. And you have to know how many people engaged along the way. And in that one report, it talks about all of those. It shows you all of those. And that's where I like to keep the focus. If you're just starting out, don't worry about landing page reports in the beginning. Don't worry about anything else. Just get used to understanding where your traffic is coming from, the results of that traffic, and how engaging they are in those traffic sources. And when you learn that, the rest of analytics becomes a lot easier to start using because that teaches you a lot of foundations. So that's where I would start, knowing where your traffic is coming from, what the results of that traffic is. And that one report does that.
Right, I want to call you on two things that you just said, and I'm going to ask you, let's just drill down. First of all, absolutely love that you have compared it to the way people do business anyway. Yeah. There is no change, actually. That's
the biggest misconception, is that it's done totally differently. It's not at all totally
different. It isn't. It's exactly actually a facsimile of what you are already doing. It's just doing it differently.
Yeah.
Right? It's just using different tools to get to the same result. That's the magic of it. If you get your head around that, everything makes sense. It's something that I talk to my clients about all the time. The second thing that you said was, it's not that complicated to do. Yes, it is. I have been swimming in Google Analytics for about a year. It is of mind-boggling complexity. It is labyrinthine in its depth.
It can feel like that.
Once you get in there, it is possible to get lost and never come out again.
Right, which is why you go to that one report and you stay there.
Exactly. That's exactly. Yes, that's exactly why I'm asking you to, like, where do we focus? You got to start somewhere.
Yep, that's exactly right.
You got to find somewhere. Having said that, I also remember how hard it was to find that one report.
It is. It's buried. It's so bad.
Right, they
my
hide
favorite
it.
report, and they bury.
Yeah, not only that, but all the buttons that there are around it.
Yeah.
Make it incredibly difficult because
they have made it simpler now to find. So now there's a search bar that's in Google Analytics.
At the top.
So you can go there and just type in source and you start typing it in.
Is it good? I've not really tested it too much.
For finding reports, it is. It's not great for most users. They have this thing where they're like, oh, we give you insights and AI and
right.
We'll give you, it's not useful for that for most.
Like, is Facebook the best for me?
that's
it won't give you that answer.
It's not really great at that stuff. But if you're looking for a particular report, it's fantastic. And especially when you're just starting out, because there is elements, there's like levels to Google Analytics. And the way that we think about it, like we call it the measurement journey at our company, right? At measuremarketing.io. So you start off in the cave, which is you have no idea what's going on. You don't know what your numbers are. You just know you have a website and people ask you, how's it performing? And you're like, I don't know. I didn't know I could even.
It's still on.
Right. Like, I guess, right? Like, I'm not even sure. Let me go check and make sure. And so that's where everybody starts. You start off in the cave. You don't really know what's working or what's not. Mm-hmm. And then there is that element of you have to turn things on. And that is the first stage. And you will find with analytics, with all new skills, but specifically analytics, because it can be so easily overcomplicated because there's so much back there. To your point, you came into a report, then you saw another report, then you went to another report. You're like, I don't know how I got where I'm at, and everything seems to contradict to things. And it can feel like that, right? It's easy to do that. So how you avoid that is you give yourself permission to get good enough to get going, and you're going to come back and make it better later, and you're going to layer it. And that's what the journey is all about. So you turn it on first. You get into the source medium report, you can just type in source medium, and that's how you can find it in the search bar. It'll pull it up for you, and then you'll get used to where it is. And then you start figuring out, okay, I'm going to start to understand the traffic sources as they are. Then I'm going to understand results, because you don't have results in the beginning. You have to set them up. So you're going to realize you can't track the results because you have to learn how to do goals. And there's a little bit of baby steps to that. But all of a sudden, you get to this point where you've lit it up now. You've turned it on. You've got some information back there. And you're starting to get the very basic steps of a story in place. It's not perfect, it's not completely clear, but you got the basic beginner steps of a story of what's coming in and what's happening for that traffic that's coming in. Then you level it up again. So what happens is you go from the cave into the valley of visibility. That's where you can kind of look around. You go, okay, I can kind of see some of what's going on, but I really want to, I want to know the difference between my Facebook traffic and my email traffic. And maybe at that point you have to start customizing analytics. Now there are ways to do that. That's very simple, things that it's built in, things that it's there to do, something called UTMs that people can use to do that. But that's not something you have to worry about in the beginning, right? Just get used to what's back there and the structure of it, because that never changes, right? That report's never going to look different. It's always going to have the same structure. And that's where the lesson is in the beginning, is learning the structure and understanding that what the story is. And again, it's not going to be super detailed. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to tell you everything you want to know. That's okay, because that's where you are right now. Then you level it up. You learn UTMs. You learn how to set goals bigger. Then all of a sudden you come in, you start using Tag Manager, and you start really customizing stuff. And then you go into this higher level. So we call the cave, then we go into the valley, then you go into the hills, then you go into the summit. And what's cool about this journey is, for me personally, and I do this with my team all the time, is giving yourself permission to get good enough to get going. That's all that matters. Get good enough to get going, come back and make it better later. Don't get caught up in, somebody said I should use UTMs right now, but we're not even using analytics. Now I got to figure UTM. Well, now I got to learn how to set a goal. Well, now then there's this Tag Manager thing, like what? And all of a sudden you've added 17 things on your plate and you haven't even taken a bite. It's hard.
Yeah.
Right? It's hard. It's a recipe for overwhelm.
Yeah.
So instead you go, all the stuff's out there. I'll get to that when I need to. Right now, good enough to get going. Let's just turn the thing on.
Yeah. I love the idea of learning this incrementally, because, we did start talking about just the sheer volume of data that there is. Really everything in all of our ecosystem, our personal digital lives is being gathered. Yep. And you can in some way access that information, and as a marketer you can see kind of macro pictures of what's going on. So let's talk a little bit in the language that most of us understand. And what I mean by that is, and how Google Analytics provides insights. So for example, and we do this and we build these systems for our clients as well, but explain a little bit in the language of email and in the language of your website what Google Analytics can tell you about a recipient's behavior when they open your email, right? You can track what they click on. You can see how long they spend on a web page. Just describe it that. What is it? If I want, how do I actually use this? I want to get to how do I use the information, but first is what does that information look like if I don't really understand the technical side, right? In the language of emails and website, if that makes sense.
100%. It does. Yeah. So you could start out with, again, when they click on an email, they will come to your site. Your page opens up. right? Now, there are different ways to set up measurement of that email. But let's say that you click on it, they open up your page, and analytics will tell you what the landing page is, what they call the landing page, which is the first page of that user's visit, right? Of what they call the session. So it'll tell you this is the first page of the session. And then it will also show you the other pages they saw in that session. And it will tell you anything that was results oriented from that session. So any goals that you had set up. So whether they requested a form or clicked on a number to dial a call or something like that, like it can be set up to measure all of that. And remember, there are different levels of this. So when you're first starting out, you sort of just get your emails out there and you're just happy you figured out how to use the email system, right? And you get your emails out there. Then you send an email out to everybody, and then you start seeing your site, and people start coming to the site from different emails, and you see the page that you had in the email. You said, oh, go to my landingpage.com, whatever that page was. And all of a sudden you see in analytics, oh, there's a big bunch of people seeing landingpage.com. And you're like, great, I know that it's working, right? I've got that. Then you start setting goals. That's how you can start tying those landing pages to the goals that they're actually achieving and all of that stuff.
And you can see sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, but then you can level it up. So, and I'll give you kind of a tippy top example. And I want to be real clear that what I'm about to talk about is what's possible, not what you need to do now. Just know that this is the journey, right? I'm just further ahead on the journey. That's the only difference between you and I, right? I've just been on this path a little longer, so I've got our system doing different things. But what I have set up, so I can tell very specifically which email they clicked on. I know the email number that they clicked on. I know what the subject line of the email was that they clicked on. I know the page they landed on. I know of that page, how many of those people were there 10 seconds later, what we call it being introduced to the page. We actually measure that as a separate thing. I know how many people showed interest in that page by scrolling down and sticking around for at least 45 seconds. I then know how many people actually considered the offer, what we call investigating the offer. So I can see the offer, whatever it was for that page, is then how many people stayed there and looked at it for at least 4 seconds. I measure for that. And then how many people initiated the next step, which is clicking on the button to go to the cart. And then from there, of course, we measure how many people completed the sale and et cetera, et cetera. So you can level up analytics. That's more of a summit style, right? A higher level path. But that's the concept, is what analytics is really good for. This is how I think about it. It's just a database. It's a place to store information. That's all a fancy word is, right? Database, place to store details, store information. But it's made to store a certain type of information, which is behaviors that your users are leaving behind on your site. So every click can be stored. Every page view they see can be stored. Scrolling can be stored, right? If they watch a video, maybe you've got a video that demonstrates what the property looks like or something like that, or some sort of prospectus, and you've got an informational video, you can measure if they've watched that video, right? You can measure if they completed a form. You can measure if they clicked on a phone number that's on your site to initiate a phone call or to complete your contact us request. You can measure for all of that stuff. And analytics is built to store all of it. And then all you need to do is go into analytics and look at the reports to say, okay, did my website, did it work like it's supposed to? Very similar if you had a sales team and you would go to that sales team and say, hey, are they doing the job? Like, you don't just look at a salesperson's numbers and say, oh, you sold 2 things. Okay, like that's it. No, you go, well, you're supposed to sell 10 things. Why are you only selling 2? Well, how many dials you make? You only made 3 dials? Okay, well, there's the issue, right? We need to get more dials. And you would do the same thing with Google Analytics, except you go to the website and you say, well, did the website do its job? And it goes, well, I got 3 people to request information. You're like, well, you should have got 10. Why only 3? Well, there's only 5 people that showed up. Okay, we've got to get more traffic. And now we go and we work on getting Facebook social sharing or LinkedIn or whatever the thing is that we're doing for our traffic sources to improve traffic so that we can get more leads. But that's how you look at it. It's just a place to store information. The information is the behaviors that people are leaving behind. And no matter what the number is in analytics, this is a pro tip: numbers people versus non-numbers people. Because I have that, we do a lot of training for people who are like, I'm not a numbers person. And this is the only difference. Numbers people see the numbers and they essentially see through them and they understand they're looking at behaviors. So they don't look at 17 and then go like, okay, no, they go, oh, the 17 people saw the landing page. And they see that behavior. They see 17 people seeing landing pages. That's how they interpret that. People who are not numbers people see the 17 and they stop there and they go, I don't know what 17 means. And they just stop at that number. And that's what's important about analytics, because there's so many numbers. So people get overwhelmed really quickly. But if you realize it's just a behavior, and if you see the number of people were landing pages, or something like the source meeting report where it says 100 people came in from Facebook and 10 of those became leads, you go, oh, 10% of people who come from Facebook become leads. So now I have a story of, if I want 100 leads, I have to get 1,000 people to come from Facebook. And I can start actually taking what's in analytics, and that's the whole people looking for insights all the time, right? It's really just actions. I want to be able to take actions. So analytics can show me what the trends are, what the pattern is from those users that are on my site. And then I can use that as information to actually take action.
Yeah,
it's always about truth is in the trend, the power is in the pattern. It's not about the individual number. It's about all the numbers together and what the story is that they're telling you.
it is incredibly exciting, this whole area. I just find it extraordinary. And I feel, like a cave. I feel like I was floundering in the dark before I started doing this. Seriously, I mean, I spent 2-3 years building a website, I had no clue about traffic to it. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that you've described, a really tangible use of this data, apart from knowing where traffic is coming from. Yep. So if, let's say, you are putting out content as we do on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, we can see which of those channels are the most productive, which are sending the most traffic to the website, right? So we can then start to make decisions about where we might advertise, for example. Right. Another really useful way of doing this, and this is, I'm just couching this in the frame of almost a rhetorical question, but another way that we use it is we can track user behavior down to the actual individual on the site by linking it to our email database, and create hot lists. So we can segment who's been the most active on the website in the last 2 weeks. They are targets for follow-up calls or for automated emails, etc. What other uses in that way do you see, do you use, or do you find your clients using Google Analytics for?
It's it's always going to come for us. It's always going to come to that same model, that ACE model, right? So it's awareness, which is how many people were aware of the thing in the first place. That's your Facebook traffic coming in. You're like, oh, I know all these different traffic sources. We don't necessarily know if it's productive or not yet, but we know it generates traffic to those pages. And then it's measuring for what's the purpose of that page. What is it supposed to do? And to your point, with like a hot buyer, a hot lead type of thing, it's what's the unique difference between somebody who's a hot lead and somebody who's not, right? Who's just a browser, who's just going to kick the tires. And so you think about the different behaviors of those two, that's what you measure for. And that's how you know, okay, I'm going to group the segment of individuals that have these hot lead type behaviors, and we're going to pull them aside, and then we're going to accelerate emails to them, right? Something like that. So there's a lot of email systems that'll do that. If they click on a link of a certain email, it'll give you additional engagement signals. As an example, we had a car dealership that we've done work for where we set up engagement signals based on browsing, because everyone's gone to car dealerships. It's kind of like, well, car dealerships online, where they're looking around and saying, no, it's just, just to see. Right. And you're not really a buyer. Maybe you're interested in buying a car a year or two out from now. You want to see roughly you're just starting your journey. You're not a buyer. You don't need a phone call from somebody. You don't need to be retargeted on. Well, you do very different behaviors. You do very surface level browsing style behaviors. But if you're a buyer, you start looking at the car, you start looking at the car images, you start seeing what the finance rates are. You might enter in a request for finance, and really, because now it matters, right? You might be doing something the next 30 days. So it makes sense to maybe do some of that stuff. And so all of that we measure for, and that gives them a higher engagement signal, which they can then take and then use for retargeting purposes, or if they do have an email address, it gets associated with the email so that somebody on their end, when they get that lead coming in, knows, call them soon, because they are clearly showing, I am interested in buying something from somebody soon, so might as well be them, right? Because they're on their current site right now. They know the most about the brand right now. So it makes sense to contact them. So there's some ways that you can use analytics. Again, it's a little more advanced to do that, but it's possible. And I think that's important is people that are starting this journey, if you're in the cave setup, know that stuff's out there. Don't worry about doing it today, because you won't be able to today. But you will get there as long as you learn the basics. And you start with the source medium, start understanding where your traffic's coming from, and you start learning goals, because that teaches you the structure and how to read for a story. And then all the other reports become more useful. And then what happens is you start answering your basic questions. And as soon as you do that, you start asking bigger questions. And then you go, well, I need to figure, I don't have those details. And you're like, well, I got to measure for that. Well, how would I do that? And then you start using other tools and all of a sudden improving your setup of analytics, and the implementation improves. In fact, when we talk about the journey in the cave, we actually have a little drawing for this, but it's a person walking around with a flashlight. And then in the valley, they're bicycling around because the vehicles changed. Implementation has improved from a walk to a bicycle. In the hills, they're in a car. And then in the summit, it's a helicopter. And that's symbolic of the fact the implementation gets more complicated, gets more powerful, and it levels up. And so everybody wants to race toward the helicopter. But what happens if you build a helicopter in a cave? Not very useful, right? And that's what a lot of people will do. Right? They'll get these really complicated setups, and they can't use them. They take everything apart anyway.
That's
the whole concept. First things first. You get used to it, and then you answer the questions that you have, and you start building and building and building. But I think it's important to know what is possible, because then you go like, oh wow, that's why it's worth it to get through the harder, uncomfortable stuff when you try to learn the basics of it. Right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's exactly what we're talking about, right? The potential is so incredibly powerful that it's important not to be intimidated by taking the first step.
Yeah.
Right. To get out of the cave, to use your analogy.
And now, I'll tell you the way we think about it, just as a framework to help others sort of wrap their head around this, is offline, there is always a conversation that's happening. It's very easy to think about this. Somebody comes into your office building, you have a conversation. Somebody picks up a phone, you have a conversation. And that conversation is always there. And it's very easy for you to help that person move through whatever the customer journey is, because you're the one helping them. And you can hear their voice and their tone and what they're saying, or you can see it, what their facial expressions are. Very easy to do that. But on digital, it's very harder. It's harder. It's not hard. It's harder to do that, because now what happened is you're out of the equation. Technically, you're not there anymore. Your website becomes your proxy. So your website is between you and the customer. And so you still have a conversation that's happening, except that it's happening between the website and the customer. And if you do not measure the website, you cannot hear that conversation.
Yeah.
And nobody in the right mind would ever say, like, I don't care what the other person's saying. I'm just going to keep shouting out stuff until they do things. Nobody would ever do that in the offline world, but they do it all the time digitally, because they don't realize, like, oh, actually, if I use analytics, I'm measuring. And the better I get at measurement, the better I can understand the conversation the user is having with my website. And sometimes you'll see things where a website is really doing horrible things to them, and you're like, oh, you shouldn't do that. Like, you shouldn't punch them in the face. Like, let's not do that. Let's change this button. Because how many times have you been to a website, you clicked on something and it 404s because they have no idea that's happening? Well, you can measure for that. And that's a way of the website sort of punching us in the face as a user, being like, we don't want you here. And it's like, why should I make it that hard to use website? Don't have to. Analytics can help you measure that stuff, where you can make sure the website's having the conversation that you want it to have with the users, and that the users, more importantly, are having the conversation back with that. And then you can adjust your marketing and keep things moving.
The analogy that I use actually is that using data in the way that you're describing is very similar to the offline world. Again, you use a lot of trigger terms that I use all the time, actually. The offline or the analog world to the digital. It's very, very similar to the way that we read nonverbal cues. So as you and I communicate on a video here, I can see you nodding. Yep. So I know that you're accepting the concept, right? And if I see you frown, then I know that I need to adjust my communication a little bit to fill in the gaps. With digital communication, with Google Analytics, you can actually synthesize that exact same human form of interaction, but you can do it online. And it's just mind-blowing. When you start to get it right, the power that it gives you is just extraordinary. So, but I do want to ask something, because there's another keyword that you've used that I think is quite magical. And again, one of the keywords that I use, and that is the idea of storytelling. So I'm going to ask you for some advice, if I may.
Sure. I
have clients, and we run Google Analytics, not at the same level as you do, but we're pretty good at it. I'm a total addict for UTM codes. I cannot send out a single link without a UTM.
You should feel allergic if you do that, right? Exactly.
Something. Well, what can I put in my UTM code? I need to get something in there.
Love it.
Like one guy, one email, I'll still build it. But when it comes to explaining to my clients, attempting to describe what's happening on their website, number one, in a way that they can understand, I usually just grab screenshots of graphs. I'll figure out a way of getting a graph for some kind of traffic pattern, if it's comparing LinkedIn with Facebook, or if it's growth over time, or if it's the top performing pages or whatever it happens. If a particular campaign is doing well, I'll create a chart. But I don't tell stories. And when I read that about stuff that you do, and you've mentioned that a few times, I find it absolutely fascinating. Tell me something about storytelling with Google Analytics, particularly when you are reporting to a client. Connecting the dots for clients.
100%. That's exactly right. Yeah. So part of our framework, we talked about that measurement journey. We go from the cave to the hills, and then through the cave to the valley, to the hills, to the summit. Well, how you get through each process is something we call the pillars of measurement marketing, the 5 pillars. And so you go through these 5 pillars at the cave, you go through them again at the valley, you go through them again at the hills, you go through them again at the summit, and over as you go from summit to summit to summit. But the 5 pillars are first planning. This is important. So first you figure out what questions you're trying to answer. You think about what the information is that you need to collect to get those answers. And this is the most important question of all of them. What actions will you take based upon the answers? So you go through that, what we call the KIA process, QIA. So it's question, the information I need to answer, and then what actions will I take based on those answers. With that plan, then you can move into the build, where you are setting up Google Analytics and making sure it's collecting all the information that you need to answer the questions you thought about, right? So you can take the actions based on the answers that you get from it. So that's the build. So we got planning and building. Then there's reporting. And this is answering the question that you were asking, which is, how do I tell a story of this information? So that's where something like we use Data Studio. So it's a program called Google Data Studio as a platform, free from Google. Again, thank you, Google. But you can create a dashboard. And what I like about dashboards, which is, you don't have to live in Google Analytics. I just use Analytics primarily to store information. I don't really live in it to get the information from Analytics. I use Data Studio. And the reason that I use Data Studio is because it can be very selective. And again, it connects directly in with Analytics. You just tell Data Studio, get your information from Analytics. And then I tell it, here's what I want to know. I want to know how many people saw step 1 or completed step 1. How many of those people completed step 2? How many of those people completed step 3? And then we put it in like little blocks with arrows. And we'll just tell the story. So I can say 100 people started here, then 50 people were here, and then 25 people were here for this amount of dollars. So it created, per order or whatever it was for generating this much revenue or whatever the thing is that I'm measuring. But I have my story. So that's the reporting, because now I'm getting the answers from the dashboard. And it's not with a bunch of other numbers that don't make sense or I don't really need to know. It's a very clean story, no distraction. So that's one pro tip is just keeping the information you need, and that's really it. But you connect the dots in that way by showing the stages and the steps. And again, all that is ACE goals. Something else we call results and how, which is know what your results are, but you have to know how you're getting those results, because that's really the secret sauce to how you ended up where you are. So we put that results and how steps in there, right? Step 1, step 2, step 3, whatever the thing is. And that's just the reporting. So we've got planning, building, reporting. This is how you know when you're really leveling things up, how you really start making your numbers useful, is you take the information that you've learned, right? These answers that you've gotten, and you use them to forecast your near future. And that's the 4th pillar, is forecasting. So instead of always looking back in our data and saying, well, what just happened? It's, did this work like it was supposed to? And you start marketing forward. Did the website do its job? So it was supposed to get 100 people. Did it get 100 people? Of those 100 people, 50% of them were supposed to convert to step 2 to go to that next step. Did they? And it goes, well, no, 25% converted. You're like, okay, there's an issue there. Let's go back to the website, maybe take some actions to fix that, because it didn't match our expectations. And so, but if it did, right, then it's just like, okay, if everything worked the way it's supposed to, cool, let's just scale traffic. Like that's the next obvious step, scale traffic. And so what happens is you got the planning, right? Figuring out what questions you're trying to answer, the information you need to get the answers, and then what actions will you take based on those answers. You're sort of just role playing that a little bit. Then you build, you collect the information and make sure it's stored in Google Analytics. Then you use something like Data Studio to actually tell the story. It's easier to do it with that platform. And you chart, here's step 1, here's step 2, here's step 3. Technically, if you just wanted to stay in Google Analytics, you could do that with a custom report as well, to say, here's goal number 1 achieved, goal number 2 achieved, goal number 3 achieved. You can do that. Then there's the forecasting where you're now saying, okay, here's how this thing is supposed to work based upon how it's been working. So your data, right? Your users, your feedback mechanism is coming in and it's helping you guess better to what your forecasts are. And then you measure the actual traffic against your forecast now. And you sort of just repeat the process. And that brings you to the 5th pillar, which is optimization. How do you make things better? And it'll tell you like, hey, this is where you thought it was going to be 50% conversion rate, but it was a 10% conversion rate. You're like, okay, that's the place we go look. What happened there? because it was converting at 50%. Why is it now only converting at 10%? And you start to tinker and you start to really understand. It goes back to that conversation with the users, right? That weird offline feeling that you can have with all of a sudden you're just dealing with numbers, but there's something that flips the switch in your head, and all of a sudden you realize you're dealing with people. And it's just, there's a bunch of them at a time, and you start to understand, like, okay, I'm confusing a lot of people at this stage. Just like if you were a business owner, I'm the same way you are. I really love thinking about offline because it's the easiest thing in the world. And if it works offline, it'll work online in a lot of cases. So I think about it, if I owned a grocery store or a shoe store, keep it something simple, nice little retail shoe store in a strip center somewhere. And if I've got people coming in and I realize I'm looking at my either camera looking at everybody in the store, or I'm just at the front of the store and I see a bunch of people coming in and milling about the front of the store, but no one's going to the back of the store where the expensive sneakers are. Do I just go like, that's how shoe stores work? No, of course not. You would never do that. You'd say, well,
what do you do?
Right. Let's look at what's happening. Oh, there's a big wall in between there with no door. Okay. Well, let's put a doorway in there. And you put a doorway in there, you see a trickle of people coming back, and then something goes, well, there's a trickle coming back, but there should be a lot more people. You know what we could do? Just take out the whole wall. And now they just come direct, and you go, okay. And you start to learn. That's exactly the process you go through digitally.
Yeah, isn't it amazing?
There is people that they don't want to feel like they don't know the answer, and they are afraid to get to that stage. But that's how, if you think about offline, like that's exactly what happens online. People just build walls, and they put in these obvious things that are going to cause bad behaviors, unexpected behaviors on their site. And it's okay to be wrong and to try something and it not work, because they'll tell you, the marketplace will tell you, they'll say, hey, I don't like that. And you just adjust it. And then how about this? Or how about that? You just get used to experimenting and iterating.
Yeah, this is exactly the point. You've really hit the nail on the head. As we move towards the end of the podcast, I would love to talk to you for a lot longer. The point is, how do we use the data from a practical perspective? When you talk about the shoe store, I'll share one little anecdote in a second. But the shoe store, the first thing that came to my mind, and I was transposing it from a website as well, if the stuff that I really want people to sell, the high value stuff, is in the back of the store and people are gathering at the front, and I've got one, I just thought, no, bring all that stuff to the front. Instead of burying it on a web page deep into my website, stick it on my home page. For example, right? That's one way that we could use
and that's the thing, is you can test that and see, did that work?
Yeah.
Maybe it totally did.
That's
right?
the beauty.
Maybe it didn't, but that's the thing. You try it.
Yes.
And you say, well, here's what should happen. You don't just, here's important. You don't just try it. You don't just bring a bunch of shoes and be like, let's see what happens. You go, well, in theory, if I bring all these expensive shoes up front where all the people are, I will sell more. How many more? I don't know. Maybe 10% of the people buy the expensive shoes. Forecasting. Right? Then you do it and you see, and did I sell 10% of those, people buy? And if they did, great. Like it's working the way you wanted to. No harm, no foul, right? Maybe use the back of the store for other things, right? Because now you've figured out a way to make it work. But if it didn't, you go, okay, well, let's figure out, maybe we'll just take out that wall and they can get back there, or whatever the thing is.
I mean, when you get to Procter & Gamble level, you can start worrying about colors and hues.
100%.
But just to make the point, one difference is that you can see, for example, if you have a CTA, a button on your website that says, please sign up for our newsletter. And this is a big thing. I see so many sponsors, so many real estate developers who don't even have a button that's a call to action, like give me your name and email address. Blows me. I've even recorded a short video and I now send it to people all the time. I got an email this morning from a guy. I hope he's listening. You have to pay attention.
Yep.
Is they sent me an email to his new website. It had a gorgeous picture. There's absolutely nowhere for me to sign up for anything. I was on deep in the page. Yeah, it's like, what the heck? What's going on? So
it was a great book, right? Don't Make Me Think was the book. I think it was.
Yeah.
Don't make them think. Don't make them work too hard. Like, why are you making them do all that effort?
Exactly. And so one way that you can use data, this kind of data, is to say, if I have my lead generation button in the middle of the page, if it's red, if it's blue, if it's top right, if it's at the bottom of the page, you can see people, especially I like pop-ups particularly, as long as they don't slow the page down. But especially with pop-ups, you see how many people click on it and how many actually convert, meaning how many people actually give you their name and email address. And if you test it here, there, and everywhere, you can find the optimal spot for it. Now, with that example, of course, it's been done. So people have figured that out.
That's kind of the cool part. Yeah.
You don't
That's
have
exactly
to spend
right.
a lot of time trying to figure that out.
Yep.
It's known what to do. But if you're a specialist in a particular area of real estate or whatever your business is, you might not know where those trigger points are for people. And if you know where people are navigating your website, you can see where they're lingering. That might be something to put on your front page.
Yep.
To grab all those people that don't make it to the back of the store, right?
Right. That's exactly right.
Let me, we should wrap up. I'm going to ask you 3 sign-off questions. I'm dying to know, Mercer, this is such a fascinating field. I could see how one could become completely immersed in it. How did that happen for you? What is it about data analytics and about Google Analytics that stopped you at that skill and not decide to, do something else?
Yeah.
In the digital marketing world.
Right. So we originally started as a website, which was a WordPress site to show people how to create WordPress sites. Like that's how we started. And then that led into, hey, this is a lot of work. Can you just do the site for me? So we learned outsourcing and started building a little company that built WordPress sites. And then we wanted to differentiate ourselves. So we decided to say, well, we'll build the WordPress site, but then we'll do conversion rate optimization, which is just the process of measuring and then improving things. So in that measurement process is where analytics comes in. You set up analytics on the website. So what happened for us is we started showing people that. And all of a sudden people would stop talking about their website as much anymore. They wanted to know more about their numbers. And that's where we realized there was the pivot to be made. In terms of how and why I am so numbers oriented. I think it's my personal background in sales management. So I've somewhere around 20 some odd years in sales management, multitude of types of sales, teams, models, but because it's all the same. It's all the same. And it can all be managed by the number. And I always have since I was first starting out. I learned to manage it by the number. So I've always done it by the number. It was always, number of dials or appointments set or presentations made or whatever the thing was. How many people did you ask? How many people considered? How many people actually ended up buying? And then no matter what that was. And so I got very good at that model and measuring that model over and over again. So I know the power. I came into analytics with a benefit that others don't. I knew the power of numbers. So I came into analytics going, oh, this platform will do measure all the stuff for me. I don't have to go and have them fill out a stupid form or ask them or follow them around and that just does it on. It's not perfect. I knew that what to do with the numbers that it had. So I was more interested in how to help it to tell me the story that it wanted to tell me. And that's where I got very good at it. And then obviously now we just teach it to others so they can get good at it. So that's how I came from, is I had this inherent understanding of how to use the numbers to forecast, because I have an unhealthy obsession with controlling the future. It's just I'm very uncomfortable with not knowing what's going to happen in the future, especially the near future. Long future, it's okay. I want to keep a bit of a game. But next week, I want to know what's going to happen next week. So I use numbers to predict that. And now I know, next week what I expect to sell, and the week after that, and the week after that. And I can, with reasonable certainty, know that's going to happen, barring any major events or something along those lines. And if something doesn't go according to plan, I'm going to know exactly why it didn't. And I'll go have a conversation with my marketing team to say, hey, here's what happened. What do we do? And they will know, and they'll take adjustments, and they'll tweak it, and we'll see if we hit the next forecast based on that. So it's a very comfortable thing for me in that way. But I think that's it. It's the sales management, because it taught me how predictable and just eerily predictable numbers are, and people are, behaviors are. There's no secret science to it. X amount of people are going to opt in. X amount of people are going to buy. It's always going to be like that. It's nice comfortability to that.
I in a prior life, and we'll wrap up in a second. I've actually got one question. I do want to ask you about your courses. I want you to tell us a bit about your courses, because I did scan those. I want to ask you which you recommend. But before, I want to tell you this just ever so briefly story. When I was in Japan many years ago, I was president of a division of Universal Studios. I was responsible for Asia Pacific, and we built movie theaters. These huge monster multiplex movie theaters. And the first one I built, I've never ever done anything like it in my life. Who has? It's like such a random thing you would do. But I spoke Japanese, so they hired me. That was my primary qualification. And I remember that the POS, the point of sale system, was was seated on, I got all this data from the people that installed that thing. And it was based, they described it, they said it sits on top of Access, which is Microsoft Access, which for those who don't know is the database that gathers data that comes in. And then you have this software on top that, like Data Studio, just kind of makes it easier to ingest, to understand. And so I asked them to give me access. I asked them to give me the Access data, like the raw data, and they cautioned me against it. But I got it. I created my own analytics and my own charts to understand my expenses. And I threw huge staffing at the open, like massive amounts of staffing. When we opened, it was the first one of its kind that opened in Japan. And I was one of the first to open it. And so I just threw everything. So my costs were through the roof. But as I was able over time to see patterns of behavior when people came in, at what time did they buy? How long before a movie opened did they buy stuff? What did they buy? How could I? It allowed me to refine my processes so that my costs dropped off. And if it hadn't been for that data, I would have just kept throwing everything I had at it. Like just, just sheer weight of numbers, I would have managed the process. But instead I got better and better. So.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And to your point, there is that truth is in the trend, right? You start to see data. When you start to look for that story, you will see a pattern. It'll be the same story next week and the same story next week. And then all of a sudden that becomes, from a story, it becomes your story of how your users use your site. And then you understand that behavior. And then because you understand it, well, probably better than average chance. That's what they're going to do next week and the week after that and the week after that. Yeah. Now you can start taking real action because you're not wondering like, what happened today? I don't know. It's going to happen tomorrow. Who knows? You will know, and you'll have a better than average chance of it being reasonably useful information that you can actually take some action on.
Well, you know what's so super cool about it as well is once you figure out a winning formula, even if you just test it in a small area, you can be relatively confident that it will work on massive scale.
It's true. Yep.
It's really, I mean, it is that is the secret to success online. Why? Because it's actually the secret to success in marketing. It always has been throughout the course of history. Right? This is what they did. They would send.
We're not reinventing the wheel. It's a different way to use a wheel.
Exactly. It's right. It's just a slightly more powerful wheel that's bigger because the number of people. But even then, it's not. I've just been reading. We'll have to stop. But I've been reading the Robert Collier letter book, and he talks about all these 1904 some of this stuff. Exactly what we're talking about. You could replace the word Google and data analytics in this book, and you would think it was current. It's just really incredible. Free sign-off. Actually, before I ask my sign-off questions, these are kind of lightning fire. I got to ask you, you got an amazing array of courses on your website. What would you, I'd really like to take one or two, or maybe more, actually. I'm intrigued by Data Studio. I'd like to have enough time to do anything, but I do want to upgrade a little. You've inspired me. So first of all, do you have one on how to kind of format Data Studio? And secondly, either way, where would you recommend somebody who's listening that's just, like my 9-year-old said, just sitting there going, like head exploding. Where would you recommend they navigate on your website to find the easiest point of entry, that first step out of the gate?
Yeah, so I would, measuremarketing.io is our homepage. So on the homepage, you'll see it's kind of built to be a directory of next steps based on what you're looking for. So there is a free level membership, we call our toolbox membership. So if you want to get some basic training, and we do like new training every week for different types of audiences, and we've got a bunch of tools back there. You can kind of get our little, like, try us out and see what we have back there. 100% love to have you back there for that. And then there's different courses that we offer. So our courses, we call them WIN courses. And WIN stands for what I need, because we're very big believers in you don't need to know every bell and whistle analytics has. That's why when you ask me, like, how do we use analytics? I'm like, go to one report and sit there until you know it, right? You don't need to worry about the other 400 reports, because when you're ready, those other reports are going to make a lot more sense after that. So we have these little win courses, and they walk you through how to set up analytics or Data Studio or Tag Manager, Google Optimize for split testing, and everything else in between. Strategy, how to figure out your measurement plan, how to optimize your sites. Like we have lots of courses back there. So we call these win courses. So all of those, the way that we deliver those, we have something called the Measurement Marketing Academy. And that's what I would recommend. If somebody really wants to learn this stuff, that's what I would do. I would skip the toolbox, go to the Measurement Marketing Academy. And then we have 3 versions of that. So we have a starter edition, which gives you access to all the courses. And then we also have instructors, which is what separates us out. So you can ask an instructor and then send over a video or a screenshot of what you're actually seeing. That's what we encourage you to do, and say, hey, here's my website. And I'm not sure what an ACE goal should be here. Like we get that all the time. I'm not even sure what to do. Here's my website. What would you do? And instructor will send you back a video. Here's what we think you should do. Go take this win, or here's why that goal's not working. And they actually help you out. It's kind of like having a consultant on call. So even if that starter level, that's what I imagine most people watching this are, that's what I would do, is go to Measurement Marketing Academy and do the starter level. Because it gives you access to all those courses. So all the tools you'll have access to, because eventually you're going to want to know them. And you get the Ask Instructor support, amongst other things. Then there's the pro level, comes with like group coaching and some higher level stuff, but that's only for those that are really professionals in measurement that need that. So I would say most people are probably going to be at that starter level, and that's where I would be. I would stay there, take advantage of the Ask Instructor support system, ask a lot of questions. We love questions back there. Instructors actually would prefer that than somebody trying to do it on their own too much. I have a rule of like, if I can't figure it out in 5 or 10 minutes after watching the video, it's like, I'm going to ask somebody. I'm going to ask the support of the platform that I'm trying to figure out.
Okay.
So that's what we're there for.
Lovely. And what kind of time commitment at the beginner level you figure to kind of enjoy it and not feel overwhelmed?
It's a good question, because it depends. Everyone's setup is a little different. So if you're coming in completely clean, it's almost easier. If you don't have anything set up yet at all, I would recommend they go through the Google Analytics setup, how to actually set up analytics, because there's some structural things back there that make it easier for you to tell the story. Then the basics of analytics. And that really teaches you UTMs, goals, something called views in Google Analytics, and how to set all that up, because there's some structural components analytics people just don't realize are there. But when you play with them, all of a sudden analytics is telling you a story. It's super simple all of a sudden. So I would go through those. And then each of our courses, I think they're 4 to 7 lessons a piece, on average, maybe 20 to 30 minutes for each lesson. Okay. So that's kind of what I'd recommend people go through that. So it depends on the time. You don't have to spend 25 hours a week doing this if you don't want to. You certainly could if it's your job. But if you don't need that, or if it's like, hey, I just want to take an hour or 2 a week to kind of play around with some stuff and then practice some stuff, ask our instructors. And again, they'll help you. I want to emphasize the Ask Instructor support. That's what it's there for. So somebody might take a course and be like, this kind of made sense, but when I look at my analytics, it doesn't make sense. And just explain what's going on in your head. Walk us through it, using a screen share and a video or something like that. Cool. And then we'll help you out with it and give you those next steps as we go through. We're very, very high touch when it comes to that, because I think that's the most useful way to learn. 3 rapid fire. If you can.
Here we go. Yeah, lightning stuff. Oh, and I just clicked off my bloody page. Okay, there we go. What is the most important thing somebody absolutely starting off brand new with Google Analytics should keep in mind?
It's easier than they think it is. It's easier than they think it is. And it's okay to think it's complicated, because it's naturally do that. But just remember, okay, it's actually easier than I think it is, because then you look at it sometimes a little differently. You go, okay, this is easier than I think it is. Take a break. After a few minutes, if you get frustrated, come back to it with that mindset of this is easier than I think it is. And then it does get a lot easier pretty quickly. Second,
what's been the hardest lesson you've learned online or in your use of Google Analytics? Hardest lesson?
That it's easier than I think it is. And it's honestly, it really is. It's why it's like my best advice is like, hey, this is easier than I think it's going to be. And at the same time, you'll always try to overcomplicate it, because it's so easy to do that. I still do that sometimes, where I get down the rabbit hole and it becomes, how do I make this even better? How do I make this even better? And because I know it's possible. And then I realize, like, somebody, my team member will say, hey, are we trying to make something better, or are we just trying to get this good enough to get going? I'm like, oh, you're right. Like, I've worked way too hard on this. I'm already way past what I needed to be. Like, this is easier than I need it to be. Let's just back up and get going, get good enough to get going and make it better later.
Last question. What are your key daily habits that make you successful, and particularly in the online world?
So I don't know if it's specifically online world, but I will say from a personal development standpoint, the habits are, generally speaking, would be routine, having some sort of routine. One of the aspects of routine, I have 2 that I'll share. I don't know that they're mind blowing. One of them might be a little bit. One is goals, right? Just looking at the goals and saying, here's what I got coming up. And I'm always reviewing goals for what I want to do for this week, for the month. I kind of do them out for a year, 5 years, 10 years out. And then I review them morning and night. So I have that routine set up. So I sort of have this understanding of what my future, hopefully will look like soon, that sort of stuff. The daily routine task that I do that I would recommend people take action on is I have a set of emotions that I will remind myself to feel, because the world is too full and it's too easy to feel negative and stressed and overwhelmed. That stuff is on tap anywhere I want to go. I can feel that. So I have a task. We use Asana for project management. This is a true thing. I have a task daily in Asana that it says, I feel valued because, I feel abundant because, I feel curious because, and I put in every positive emotion that I can think of. And I will spend a minute just going through and reading that and coming up with something quick, stupid reason. I feel curious because of this. I feel valued because of that. I feel helpful because of this. I feel confident because of that. And I'll just come up with quick reasons and just bullet point. For me, it's like an emotional charge, because generally speaking, the world does not present lots of opportunities to feel positive about oneself. So I just kind of carved out a little space to say, I'm going to encourage myself to feel positive about these certain things. And it's a perfect way to start the day. It's because you feel empowered and you have all these examples, all these wins that you've gone through in your own head as to why all these things are true. And then your brain is used to looking for that now. So you train your brain to look at the world in a whole different way, which makes things like Google Analytics, when it starts to frustrate you a little bit, you're a little higher up, right? So that doesn't take you out right away. You're like, oh, it's okay. I feel confident because of this. I don't care if analytics is a little tougher for me to figure out. I'll be able to do it because I'm just the person that I'm a problem solver because of this other stuff, right? And you sort of just encourage that.
Chris Mercer, who you prefer to be called by your last name.
I do.
Right? So Chris Mercer, Mercer of measurementmarketing.io. What an enormous pleasure. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Definitely a pleasure being here. And again, my honor. Hopefully it's been helpful to those that are watching.
That was Chris Mercer, aka Mercer of Measurement Marketing, talking about Google Analytics and how to use data to really drive traffic to your site and to convert prospects. Yes, it's complicated. And when you get into Google Analytics, yes, it's labyrinthine, but it is worth taking the effort because the power that it will give you once you've got your website in place to really understand the impact that you're having and the relationship that your prospects are having with you remotely is beyond anything else that you can do. Strongly recommend that you do take a dive and that you go and take a look at Mercer's website. You will find a link to that on the podcast page for today's episode. And be sure, when you're at GowerCrowd.com, to go and sign up. If you're not already a subscriber, go ahead and subscribe to the newsletters packed with information about real estate crowdfunding, all there, GowerCrowd.com. That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in and for listening. Thank you, Chris Mercer, aka Mercer of Measurement Marketing, for your time with me today. It was a real pleasure. I really enjoyed learning from you, and I look forward to learning a lot more from you as we go forwards into 2021. That is all for this episode. I'll see you next time. And in the meantime, stay well. And for now, this is Dr. Adam Gower signing off.